Thank you so much. It remains to be hoped that the enormous IT advancement of Estonia is going to reach this place at a certain moment as well. It's my pleasure now to invite Jan van Boeckel from the Estonian Academy of Arts, who is a professor of art didactics. So please, the floor is yours, Jan.
Let's see if I can. Yeah, I hope to keep it within 20 minutes. Thank you for inviting me here to this conference. And my take on my presentation will be rather different, I suppose. I'll present quite a different angle from the previous speakers, but maybe also very related. In a way, it will be an invitation to maybe connect a bit to what it is to be here in this country, and also to your own being, to your own childhood. When I started here, this is just a few weeks ago, I went to a museum and I saw this postcard. I didn't see the actual painting yet, of an artist from Estonia. His name is Nikolai Trik, and it's a scene in Norway. And I was quite astonished by the use of colors that he managed to put on his painting when he was 29. It was painted in Norway. And I went hiking in your national park, La Hima, and I found this artwork made by children left in the woods. Maybe a bird, maybe a human figure, but I was quite touched by this image. And that connects me to my field, which is arts-based environmental education. It basically means that you encourage children, but also adults, to develop their sensitivity to the environment through artistic activities. And interestingly, this field, I come from the Netherlands, but this field opened up for me when I learned about work done in Finland by a group around Miri Helga Mantere. This book is called The Image of the Earth. It was done in the early 1990s, at the start of the talk about sustainability, when it came to be an issue. And it was developed in close collaboration with Estonian pre-service art teachers. They were doing activities, work camps, where they developed combinations of art and nature learning, for example, on the islands or in the nature parks. And this became the subject of my doctoral thesis at Aalto University, which is a university just a bit north of here. And to situate a bit my subject of arts-based environmental education, I would first like to talk about what is the problem, or one way of seeing the situation we find ourselves in. It is interestingly enough, I think, related to the previous speakers, because it's about us being all over the place, except at the place we actually find ourselves. So in this virtual world of our screens, we connect with all kinds of other places, but to connect with the place we're actually at, we find a hard time to do this. A week ago I found this new term, I think in the New York Times. It's called nomophobia. It's the anxiety over separation from a mobile phone. It's most common among women of ages 18 to 24, and it can be a serious disorder. You might have nomophobia if you frequently check your phone, use your phone in inappropriate places, or if you constantly check if the battery power is still on. About 10 years ago, this book came out by Richard Louv, Last Child in the Woods. It's quite a dramatic title. And the subtitle is Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. Since then, it has been translated in several languages. I participated in the translation in Dutch, Italian, Polish, Korean, Japanese, Turkish, and here Russian. One of the points he makes is that if you ask a teenager to tell something about the Amazon rainforest, what is going on there, the average child would know that these are like the lungs of the world, and that every second we chop down about the size of a football field. If you ask them to tell something about the forest behind their house, they know almost nothing. They don't know even the most common species. So something is basically out of balance, that sort of the abstract knowledge of some places far away, which is relevant, which is also meaningful, is so much larger than the actual lived experience of the place they find themselves in, and especially then the natural world. So if they engage, a child engaged in a computer game like this, it is constantly among very direct, instant stimuli. The child responds immediately and gets the satisfaction at the same instant that you press the button. What this develops is a certain ability in what's called multitasking, that you can do several tasks at the same time, but also that you become more and more able to chop up your attention, to have parts of your attention at the same time all over the place. So you do your homework, you watch television, you have your mobile phone next to you, you listen to music, and you can still do your homework. This is continuous partial attention. But what it also means is that your focus is not quite completely with the task at hand or the activity at hand. So some figures from the film Play Again, that children spend about 90% of the time indoors. In a 1 week, this is about the United States, children spend 3.5 minutes in meaningful conversation with their parents and 1,500 minutes watching television. So this has been called the disconnection from nature. Some analysts, scholars like Pyle have called this the extinction of experience, the extinction of direct relating to the living world, and nature deficit disorder, which is also in the title of the book of Richard Louv. It is not like a real disease. It is not like you can go to a physician and he or she can find out that you have nature deficit disorder. It's sort of a made-up term referring to ADHD, for example. But the point of Richard Louv is that we're actually getting some serious syndromes or problems in the coming generation because of lack of access to nature. So how can we engage children to connect to nature? Because nature is really basically, most of the time at least, slow. It requires a different sensibility. It takes time to tune in. So some educators have argued, well, let's develop some computer games, like, for example, this one, Wolf Quest, that will give children a touch of the natural world, will learn them about social behavior of wolves in this case. And it's, again, as exciting as the other games, like Warcraft or Age of Mythology. But what happens if a child plays this game and then comes in a natural setting where nothing is going on, which is extremely boring at first instance? Because it takes time to tune in. Maybe if you sit here half an hour, then suddenly you see a small mouse moving, or you hear a bird in the distance. Yeah, so from the problem to the value of nature to human beings, one, I think, very graphic way to illustrate is biophilia, the love of life. It's the Latin term, a term that was coined by E.O. Wilson. This is an image of a hospital. They have been doing research, and they found out that patients who have access, who can look out of a window to a natural setting, like a forest or a lake or a park, actually recover 1 or 2 days earlier than people who have a blind wall to look at or urban environment. So it sort of points out to the real value, our supposed need of connecting to nature. Another point is the healing gardens. People with trauma, with burnout, with different psychic problems find healing, find recovery by engaging with flowers, with plants, with gardening. And then there's this whole body of theory developed by the Kaplan and Kaplan, the pair, about attention restoration theory. The idea is that if you're overstressed, overworked, that if you take some time out in a quiet place in nature, that your attention, your focus gets restored through being in this other environment. There's something about being in nature that we tune into, and it probably has to do with that, say, 95% or more of the time we've been on this earth, we've been roaming around through forests and savannas. And then lastly, there's this idea of a sense of wonder, that nature can ignite in us a sort of connection with something larger than ourselves, with the more. But again, this takes time to develop. So now my topic of art-based environment education, why take art? Why look at art in connecting to nature? To me, art education in and with nature can potentially facilitate the crossing of the threshold from boring, being in this boring place, to making it exciting. It can increase the sensitivity. It can provide new ways to articulate the experiences that we have in nature. It can offer room for imagination and creativity, and expand our problem-solving skills, and maybe most important, allow for the soul to come to the surface and the heart to open. I'll talk a bit about these different aspects. But it all starts with direct experience, with a one-to-one direct relation to the living world. And when we engage with the living world, for example, with this girl in the moss, there is, I think, a constant dialogue between being in a receptive mode, receiving, and creating and acting upon the world. We constantly shift between sensing, taking in the world through our senses, and the making, the creating of for an artwork of our own way of connecting with this place. Here are some images from a book from Norway, from Jan Erik Sørenstuen, where he takes children out to make land art or environmental art in natural places. But to me, there are these three intersecting aspects, and there are probably more, but maybe these for me are the most meaningful. It's so in the connection with nature through art, you have engaging the senses, you have acquiring knowledge, and evoking imagination. First, engaging the senses. So our sensory apparatus, our ears, our eyes, our skin, and so on. This is an artwork done by Erica Fielder from California, where she sits with this hat, and it has a few seeds on it. And the idea is that you have to sit so quiet that a wild creature like this bird feels confident enough to land in your hand, and you can feel the minute movement of this bird chipping around on your head. But next to opening the senses, there's also this aspect of acquiring knowledge, of learning about the natural world, biology, in the biological world itself. So not in a lab, not in a classroom, but going out there to learn where roots come from, where fruits come from, and so on. And in a way, very specific way, I think this way of learning is quite different from, for example, playing with Lego bricks, which only have one way or a limited set of ways to be put together, defined by the brick itself. Other ways of working with natural environments is that you, what some have called loose parts. So for example, this part of an acorn has several ways in which you can play with it. It is not predefined. You have to invest your imagination to be able to play with such a natural form. So with the theory of Nicholson of loose parts, the idea is that the creativity is enhanced to the extent that children are able to find and play with loose parts. And this builds knowledge, for example, on construction, self-confidence, learning about the natural world through making with the things that you find in nature. And this way of knowing is basically this very close paying attention to what living species or creatures are. And then the last aspect I want to talk about is about evoking the imagination. So I think in natural places like, for example, this wood, which could be in Estonia, but somewhere in the north, or this owl that is hidden, it's sort of a magical world which evokes sort of our ways of telling stories to each other, of fairy tales, of being in some quite other place, a mysterious place that is quite different from our usual urban environment. And what educators are developing, mostly now in the Nordic and Baltic countries, but it's spreading also to other places, is ways of taking children out in the woods, into the fields, and to engage with this imaginative realm of connecting with these stories and telling stories in the forest, inviting children to develop their own stories themselves. And for example, having this sort of fairy tale-like meal on a table with covered with mosses. But another aspect of imagination, or bringing imagination into an educational setting, is what I would call wrong footing. The term comes from playing soccer. The idea is that you put your opponent on the wrong foot. So the opponent expects you to kick the ball in one way, but you actually, in practice, kick the ball in another way. So a person engaged in a learning situation in nature expects that we will do something as usual, but then you do something completely different. Why I think this is relevant is this is how most or several children would draw a tree when they are very young. So it sort of has this strange different aspects about it that we kind of lose at the age 6, 7 when we start to draw trees like this. There's a trunk in brown and a mushroom green cloud on top of it. This becomes like our archetypal tree that we keep repeating when we grow old. It's in a way our autopilot mode of reacting to the invitation to draw a tree. But as in storytelling, in the story of Snow White, at one time the queen looks at the mirror and asks the mirror if she can tell who is the fairest of all, and then the mirror says, it's not the queen, it is Snow White, and this kicks off the story. It moves the story in a complete different direction. I think this you can also practice in art, this wrong footing, in twisting the story around, developing a new plot point. That's, for example, to ask people to make a sculpture of their own body in clay, but to do this step by step with their eyes closed completely. So they're no longer in control. They cannot see if it is aesthetically pleasing what they're making. They cannot see if it's anatomically correct. But they can also not see each other. They don't feel judged making art, being in the mode of making art by others. So while people may have worked many times in their lives with clay, these kind of clay works that come out of such an activity are quite different because you're sort of propelled in a complete new direction. Another way to do this is what I call wild painting. It could start, for example, with the invitation to paint the landscape as wrong as possible. So where you see the green colors, you make them very wrong, which is red, or the sky, which is blue, you make it orange. And this comes, in a way, I think, close to your artist, Nicolai Trick. Look at just the orange layer around the green trees. Paintings can become quite lively if you start wrong and then start to add the colors that you actually perceive in the environment at that spot on top of these supposedly wrong colors. You get an interesting dialogue between different colors, layers of color. In a way, these are old methods. I mean, in art education, these have been around. But in our virtual environment, if you practice this with people, it's often very refreshing and new, and something that they are completely unfamiliar with. So, to me, the core of this is inviting the unforeseen. This is a quote of Rebecca Solnit. She says, the job of artists is to open doors and to invite the unknown, the unfamiliar. To calculate on the unforeseen is perhaps exactly the paradoxical operation that life most requires of us. So maybe relate to the previous speaker, that anticipating for the future, I think it's wise to educate learners to anticipate on this unforeseen, and to be able to calculate for it, which involves paradoxes or being able to cope with paradoxes. Some images finally of Hämeenlinna in Finland. It's not existing anymore, but these were like from 50 years ago, where children were taken out to this rebuilt house from the Stone Age and engaged with nature, but also this theater play, drama, on all kinds of levels. Here they are planting the food. They are making their own bread themselves. They burn pots. They weld iron. These images are highly unusual in the Netherlands. The children are allowed to do this. They make felting to create masks, which they can use in their theater play. And you see the house where they gather behind her. And it builds a relationship of deep trust, I would say, but also of an ignition of igniting of the imagination in such a setting. It's really a total immersion whilst the children are there. And maybe just to close off, why I think this is so important, maybe in also the doom and gloomy times we are living in today. I would like to end with a quote of philosopher Arne Næss from Norway. He died in 2009. He was the one who coined the term deep ecology. He's sort of like a key figure in the environmental movement. At one point, inspired by Immanuel Kant, he made the case that maybe we should move away from moral actions. Moral actions is that you want people to behave according to an ethical law, according to a moral duty, but it usually goes with the finger. You should do this, you should not do that. And usually behaving according to a moral law goes against your inclination, against what you want to do, but because you're pushed to it, you have to do it. He says maybe we should move to beautiful actions. Beautiful actions is actually that you do exactly the same thing. You do what is right according to a moral law. But the difference is that you don't do it because of the finger pointing at you that you should do this. This is what you ought to do. But you do it because there's an inner voice in you saying that this is what is just to do. So, for example, you're camping out in wilderness with a tent, and you have some rubbish around your tent from the night you're staying there. You clean it with a smile on your face. You do it joyfully because you feel from this inner voice that this is the appropriate thing to do. That, according to Næss, makes it a beautiful action. And I think in our relating to the times we're living in today, with extreme change, extreme states of flux, and climate change and other ecological crises unfolding, I think it's very important to shift the ground a bit from this moral action way of encouraging citizens to act in certain ways to encouraging beautiful actions. And I think connecting to nature, which could be helped, which is my point, through working with art, could be a very meaningful thing, I think, which could be explored even much further than we have started to do right now. So, with that, thank you.